In today's InnoTalk, we are honored to have Dr. Xiaoban Xin with us. Dr. Xin is an experienced patent attorney with a solid scientific background in life science at Rothwell Figg IP Professionals. In this webinar, Dr. Xin will share his extensive knowledge and discuss the fundamentals of patentability in bio and pharmaceutical technologies, how to build a valuable patent portfolio to protect your technology, strategy, and the tips for avoiding patent infringement, and how to prepare for patent due diligence. Let's now welcome Dr. Xin.
All right, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. It's great to have this opportunity to share some thoughts about patent strategies for biotech companies. A little bit about myself. I'm a registered patent attorney at Rothwell Figg, a Washington, D.C. law firm specialized in patent and other intellectual property law. Like Ella mentioned, I have a scientific background. I have a PhD in biomedical sciences. My practice includes drafting and prosecuting patent applications, counseling on patent strategies, and IP-related due diligence. I represent a wide range of clients in life science fields, including biotech, pharma, medical device, and health IT. Let's start with some basic question or concept in patent law. The first question is, when you get a granted patent, what right do you get from this patent? So different from what many people think, a granted patent does not give you the right to make or sell your invention or product. But that means having a patent protecting your product does not mean your product won't infringe others' patent. So a granted patent gives you the right to exclude others from making or selling your invention. This is a right to stop or prevent others from copying your idea or product. So the scope of exclusion is defined by claims in a patent, which is the most important part of a patent. So based on this concept, you can see there are two aspects in patent strategies. The first aspect is to get your own patent or patent portfolio. So you have an arsenal so you can use to stop your competitor. I call this offensive strategies. The other aspect is understand or evaluate or manage the risk of infringing others' patent by your own product. I call this defensive strategies. And we're going to discuss both aspects in this presentation. Before doing that, let's briefly go through some basic requirements for patentability. So in other words, what do you need to include in your patent application or to show during application process in order to get a granted patent? So the first requirement is subject matter eligibility. So under current law, there are some things are not eligible for patent protection. One of the examples is product of nature. For example, if you discover a new gene or new protein, the gene or protein by itself can be patent protected. However, you can protect the composition, containing this gene or protein together with something else that is non-naturally existing. For example, you can patent a fusion protein containing a natural protein or a recombinant vector that has a gene, but also some other regulatory sequences or elements that are not naturally existing. Also, you can always protect the method of using and making this kind of gene or protein or other product of nature. There are a type of product, they are not naturally existing, they're man-made, but they resemble a natural counterpart. For example, if you have like a pancreatic beta cell for treating diabetes, the beta cell is differentiated from a stem cell. The beta cell would resemble a human beta cell. For these kind of product, if you just claim the same feature, the feature same as a human counterpart, that would not be patent eligible. So you can consider including some features of your products that can distinguish from a natural counterpart, like something has a better function or improvement. Another example of patent ineligible subject matter is natural phenomena or law of nature. For example, if you discovered a new biomarker or a correlation between a biomarker and a disease, you can use this correlation of biomarker for developing some new diagnostic method. But under current law, if you just claiming a method of diagnosing a disease by measuring a biomarker and detecting a disease based on the measurement, so that would not be patent eligible, because that can be considered just a just a statement of the law of nature, which is the correlation between the biomarker and a disease. So this set of law actually can pose a challenge to some diagnostic technology protection. But this kind of technology can still be protected. You can consider including something unique, like unique reagent or procedure or method steps in the diagnostic procedure in your claims. And also you can consider adding some treatment steps in the claim. So you diagnose detecting a disease condition, then you administer some treatment approach to a patient. And in some cases, it may be possible to rephrase this diagnostic procedure into something else. So instead of claiming a method of diagnosing a disease, you can claim a method of preparing a sample preparation, for example, and the sample preparation step will still include the critical step that's needed for a diagnostic process. Another requirement for patentability is novelty. So this is relatively straightforward, right? If you want to patent protect something, your invention needs to be new. So nobody ever thought about that, or at least disclose it. So one thing you want to be careful is disclosure of your invention by yourself would destroy novelty, impact the novelty during your patent application. So the general advice is try to avoid disclosing your invention before you have a patent on file. There are some activities that's pretty obvious as a disclosure that can have an impact on novelty, such as publishing a paper in a journal or give a presentation at a conference. But there are also some other activities that are not very obvious disclosure activity, but that still can impact novelty. For example, grant submission. For some grant, when you submit your application, that application will be kept confidential. But if the grant is awarded, some grant platform will disclose part of the application on their online platform. So that can cause a problem. Another example is some journals. When you submit the manuscript to the journal, they can just post your manuscript online pre-publication even before a peer review. And also in the U.S., if you sell your invention to another party, even under a confidential agreement, such as this kind of a secret sale can be considered as a disclosure that can have an impact on novelty. Given that said, you probably know this in the United States, you have a 1-year grace period between disclosing your own invention and filing a patent application covering this invention. But you don't really want to rely on this 1-year grace period unless it's very necessary. Because right now, the US is the first inventor to file system. So that means if you disclose your invention, somebody learned it, and they can just file their own patent application covering your idea or a modification of your idea. So that may mess up your patent protection process. But more importantly, many regions or jurisdictions outside the US require absolute novelty, which means As long as you disclose your invention, you're not eligible, you can't seek patent protection in those regions. And these jurisdictions include the major market outside the US, such as Europe and major Asian countries. So you want to be careful of disclosing your invention if you plan to seek global protection. Non-obviousness is another requirement for patentability. So this basically means your invention can't be just something can be obtained from routine optimization of something already known, or an obvious variation of something already known in the field. So in order to meet this non-obviousness or inventive step requirement, you would need to show the improvement or superior or an unexpected result from your invention or product in comparison with something like a similar product, something already known in the field. So this non-obvious requirement is especially relevant to or important for many biotech technologies, such as a new antibody targeting a known epitope or known antigen, or technologies involving a known drug, like a combination therapy, or new use or formulation of a known drug. So in order to get overcome any obviousness rejection from a patent office, you would have to show your product, if there are any unexpected technical effect in your product. For example, if your technology is a combination of two known drugs or one known drug with something else, you may need to show a synergistic effect between these two drugs. So 1 + 1 more than 2, rather than just simply combining two drugs together. Another requirement for patentability is written description and enablement. So this basically requires that in your patent application, you need to disclose enough information so that the peers in your field can recognize that you actually made the invention. And also, based on this information, they can reproduce your invention after the patent expires. And this is also relevant to many biotech technologies, and especially patents covering antibodies or other biologic products involving an antibody. Because back to maybe 15 years or 10 or 15 years ago, if you discover a new antigen and you make one single antibody, you can have a patent covering all antibody binding to this new antigen. But it is very hard to do so right now. So it's very difficult right now, almost impossible to claim an antibody only by some functional limitations, such as just defining the antibody by the binding with an epitope or antigen. You would typically always need some structural limitations, such as the sequence of the antibody or a part of the antibody, such as the sequence of the CDRs or variation domains. So for antibody technologies, if you want to get a broad claim, you would need to, under current law, need to disclose enough example molecules in your patent application. And this is sometimes not affordable or not possible to support a very broad claim scope. So if you're working on the antibody technologies, I guess to have a realistic expectation of the protection scope, and keep that in mind when you're making your business strategies. All right, so next let's look at how to build a successful or valuable patent portfolio. So when we talk about patent protection of a technology, of building a patent asset of a company, typically we're not talking about just one single patent. We're talking about a combination of patents that can give you some value or a meaningful protection of your technology. So this kind of combination of the patent we call a patent portfolio. So a successful patent portfolio could help you, number one, of course, to block your competitors from making copying your idea. But a valuable patent portfolio can also help you to build partnership with potential players in the field or attract investment. And in some cases, it can allow you to generate revenue from licensing even before or in addition to the sales of your product. And this can be important, especially for drugs, because a drug product usually take a long time and a lot of effort and resource to before they can get on the market. If you have a patent portfolio, can start generating some revenue through license even before your product get on the market, that would be great. So let's look at in more details on what do you want to include in a valuable patent portfolio. So the first factor of successful portfolio is a reasonably broad protection scope. So we just said the patent protection, of course, it should protect your specific product or platform, but you don't want to stop there. You want to go beyond that. So you want to think, because this is the right to exclude others from copying your idea, so you want to think about what would a copyist do. Ideally, you want your portfolio to be able to block potential design around, which means to block your competitor from making different but similar product based on your inventive idea. And in some cases, it is possible to have a portfolio to cover different applications based on the same concept or different fields of use. For example, if you're developing a CRISPR system and your company may be interested in focusing on the human therapeutic application of this CRISPR system, but this system can also be used for diagnostic applications, or maybe used for modifying genes in animals or plants. So they probably have agriculture applications. So if you have a portfolio can cover these different applications or different fields of use, even your company is going after human therapeutic applications, you can choose to out-license the IP covering other fields to another party to have some revenue based from licensing. Also, a good portfolio, for a good portfolio, you want to have protection, not just a single aspect. You want protection on multiple aspects. For example, if your product is a new drug, of course you're gonna want to have a protection of the drug molecule, but you want a broader scope because you can also protect the formulation of the drug, or even different formulations of the drug for treating different disease, or a device containing this drug, method of using this drug, method of making the drug, or a research tool for making or testing this drug. So with this multiple aspect or multiple layers protection, your patent portfolio will be much stronger comparing to just to have a single or just a couple patents covering the core molecule. So this size or this breadth of the portfolio may mean value in terms of patent asset, and sometimes can be just scary enough to deter your potential competitors from entering the field. Another important factor of a good portfolio is you want to have protections through the product life cycle. And this is especially important for drugs and some other products that require regulatory process before they can get on the market. Because the early filed patent, so patent have a term, typically it's 20 years from the filing date. So the earlier filed patent often are going to expire soon after the drug is launched to the market, especially if there's a kind of a long regulatory process before the market launch. So to build an effective patent portfolio, you want to try to maximize the exclusivity from patent protection after the product is approved or launched to the market. So in order to do this, you want to have, so in addition to the early filed patent, covering the core molecules, you want to have multiple filings at different time points through the product life cycle. This is kind of overlapping with the multiple aspects protection we just discussed. And you file patent applications at a later time or at different time points, trying to cover some inventive points or information discovered later in the, or during or later in the R&D process. For example, for the later filings, you can cover specific formulations, new indications, or a specific group of patient populations, or a new dosage regimen, or some manufacturing method. So information relating to this to these aspects is probably sometimes cannot be readily discovered at the early stage of R&D, but it can be discovered during IND enabling study or clinical trials. So at different time points, if you submit these filings, these patent application or this patent will have a later expiration date. So they can, put them together as a portfolio. Your portfolio will have a longer protection term compared to just a single patent. And also, for these later filings, even their scope, protection scope, are kind of specific or narrower than the earlier filings covering the core drug molecule. If you can protect some information that you have to put on your drug label, that can be very effective to prevent the followers or the copiers entering this field. Another factor for a successful portfolio is global protection. This is also important for drugs and some other biotech products, because these type of products usually take a very long time, a lot of effort and the resource to get. So you would typically don't want to limit to one single market. So the question is, where do you seek protection? There are some considerations. The first factor, the most important factor, of course, is your target market. But in addition to market, you may also want to think about the location or regions where your potential investors, your partners, your contractors, and manufacturers, even competitors. So that can affect your global protection strategy. So typically, the common jurisdictions or regions you want to seek protection is, outside the U.S. The first is Europe. That's a major market. The next tier would be the major Asian markets like China or Japan. And then you can expand to Canada, Australia, Korea, and some other countries. So again, this will be depend on your business goal to match with your business goal. All right, so we just talked about the offensive strategy, which is making a strong patent portfolio that can be used as your weapon or arsenal to stop others from copying your idea. So next, let's look at defensive strategies. How do you evaluate or manage the risk of infringing others by your own product? So at the beginning of this presentation, we talked about the right you get from patent. So your patent do not give you the right to practice, namely selling or making your invention. So in order to be able to sell and make your product without having to worry about infringing others' patent, you have to do a different analysis called the freedom to operate analysis, or FTO. So FTO, freedom to operate, basically means you can sell, make your invention without infringing others' patents. The reason you have to, even you already have a patent portfolio protecting your invention or product, you still need to do FTO analysis, because your product may be an improvement of a technology covered by an earlier or broader patent. And here's an kind of oversimplified example, but it gives you an idea. So say you have a product that is a chair with a back support and two arms, and there is an early patent covering a chair with a back support, but without mentioning arms. So your chair would be patentable over this earlier patent because your chair had 2 arms, which can be very fancy and novel, inventive features. However, your chair would be still be covered by this earlier patent because your product is a chair and it has a back support. That's all required by this patent. So yeah, let's look at how do you know you have FTO, or how do you do this analysis? Well, basically, you would need to do searches in patent databases to identify relevant patents, which means patents potentially pose the risk of infringement. So how do you know a given patent is relevant or not? So you ask whether your product contains all elements recited in a patent's claim. If it does contain all the elements recited in the patent claim, the patent will be relevant. So here are 4 simple examples to give you some idea about this principle. Say your product has elements A or components A, B, but not element C. So let's see which one of the following patents covers your product. Patent number 1 claims a product comprising element A. Is it relevant to your product? Yes, it is relevant to your product because your product has element A, which is all required by patent number 1. Patent number 2 claims a product comprising element B. Is it relevant? Yes, it is relevant because your product has element B, which is all required by patent number 2. Patent number 3 claims a product comprising elements A and C. Is this relevant? No, because your product does not have element C, which is required by patent number 3. And patent number 4 claims a product comprising elements A, B, and C. Is it relevant? It is not, because similar to patent number 3, your product does not have element C, which is required in patent number 4. So this is just to give you just a general idea of how do you do this FTO analysis. So when you do a FTO search or analysis, ideally you would want to be able to search, find everything. But in reality, the search scope has to be limited based on the purpose of the search, or state of the company, especially the budget and time, and some other factors. So when you do FTO search, you would always want to limit or define the scope by some factors. You can do this by limiting or define the scope by keywords, which is the most common way to do. Like keywords, some keywords related to the critical function or structure even of your product. You can also define your search scope by patent owners. For example, you can just search patent owned by the major players or major competitors in your field. And in some cases, if you're just gonna focus on certain markets, you can do the search just limit to those markets or those countries. And one thing you want to keep in mind for FTO analysis is that if your product has multiple components, for FTO analysis, you would need to clear or to understand the FTO for every single of the components. For example, if you have an RNA vaccine, like the RNA vaccine we have right now, it has a RNA sequence as a payload, but also has a lipid nanoparticle as a delivery vehicle. So for this RNA vaccine product, relevant patents would include those covering the payload, but also patents include patent covering the delivery vehicle. So in order to want to have FTO for a RNA vaccine product, you would need to do the search or analyze the patents covering both related to the payload as well as the delivery vehicle. Also, when you start doing this FTO analysis, after the first FTO search or analysis, you may want to update the search periodically, such as after 6 months or after a year. So you have an updated picture, up-to-date picture of the patent landscape related to your product. Okay, now say you did your search and you screen your search result. You found some potentially relevant patents, and what do you do with them? There's no reason to panic. So it's not uncommon to find relevant patents. Actually, if you do a search and you come back say, I didn't find anything from the search, it's very likely that the search didn't work well. So the key is how to evaluate and manage the risk from these relevant patents. So here, with these potentially relevant patents, here's something you can do. The first step, you want to take a closer look of these results and really understand the level of the risk. There are several factors you want to keep in mind when analyzing these potentially relevant results. The first factor is you want to look at whether these results are granted patent or pending applications. Pending patent applications tend to have broader claims, but these claims will often be narrowed down during an application process. So for pending application, you probably just need to monitor, the change of the claim down the road. But if the results are granted patent, the claims are fixed and won't change anymore. So you will need to take those more seriously. Another factor is the expiration date. So it's very common that the broad patents are filed early. Because they're filed early, they expire early. So when you discover this relevant patents, some of those may already expire. So if they already expire, the risk is very low. And even for some patents, they are still effective, but you can see if they're expiring very soon. Especially, for example, if you're developing a drug and you have some early patent covering the molecule of the drug, but those going to expire before your product launched to the market, the risk would be still low because that will not impact your FTO of the product. Also, you want to look at the validity of the claims or the quality of the patent. Some of the patents, it may be potentially relevant, but they're simply in poor quality. And this probably you need help with the patent attorney. So based on the quality or how the validity of the claims, you may have an idea is that maybe the patent owner, it's very hard for the patent owner to use this kind of claims to assert against another company. There are some claims, they're good when they were filed or when they were granted. They're good, solid claims. But patent law change all the time. When the law changed, the new law going to apply to all the patent even before filed or granted, even before the law changed. So there are some good claims that are granted before under current law, they may not be valid anymore. So if that's the case, those relevant patents, the risk will be also low. So another factor is look at who's the owner of the patent, the relevant patent. If the owner is a small company or not, the owner is not, you've never seen any activity from the owner, or especially activity asserting others using this patent, the risk will be relatively low. But if the owner is a major player in the field and they have been very actively or consistent, using this patent asserting against others, then the risk is going to be high. So with these considerations, and you could do another screen of the potentially relevant patents. In some cases, you probably already can screen out all the patents, potentially relevant patents, and you can know that you have the freedom to operate. But it's also common that even after this further screening, there are a couple or maybe a few patents that are really relevant and they also in good quality. So these you're going to deal with that more seriously. Well, there are something you could do to handle this kind of risk. The first thing you want to consider, if you can have any design around to get over the potentially relevant patent. Remember our example of patent numbers in the previous slides, in patent number 3 and 4, that patent requires the element C, and element C is not in your product, so it's not relevant. So try to see if you can remove something from or change something from your product so that does not read on at least the one element required by this patent. This can be, this is especially important if you're still at the early stage of the research R&D process. You can still have some flexibility of changing your product. So if you do a design around, it will gonna give you some level, a higher level of freedom to operate. That can be helpful. And for some patents, if it's really hard to design around, it's really can be a potential risk. You can consider seeking a license, which means you get agreement from the patent owner. You pay some amount of money to the patent owner so they don't sue you. For this kind of license agreement, it doesn't sound good, right? You have to pay to another party so to reduce the risk. But it's not always a bad thing, especially for patents owned by universities or research institutes. And the patent is a good quality, and if you can get an exclusive license on this patent, you can actually use this patent to go against the other competitors. So this kind of license can actually be part of your patent portfolio to strengthen your patent portfolio. So that's not always a bad thing. Another thing you could do is to seek a legal opinion from patent attorney about the validity and infringement of irrelevant patents. So this is to prepare for the worst case scenario, in which you get sued for infringement, you lose the case, you have to pay an amount of damage to the patent owner. So this kind of opinion can significantly reduce the amount of damage you have to pay to the patent owner. But this is for the worst case scenario. All right, so now we talked about the offensive and defensive strategies, and let's look at how do you prepare for due diligence. Due diligence can be very important for biotech companies, especially early stage companies, because whenever you are going to raise some investment or enter a partnership or trying to sell your company or part of the pipeline to a potential buyer, they're going to do this due diligence, which means they're going to have a review and a scrutiny of your patent portfolio. So this is especially important when patents are key asset of a company. And for biotech companies, I think typically patents are the key asset. For many companies, patent is probably the most valuable, maybe the only valuable asset of the company. So in order to prepare for due diligence, you want to be prepared in advance, because you don't want a problem discovered during due diligence process, because many of the problem may not be fixed short term. So if you discover a problem during the due diligence process, that's probably too late. They're going to affect the deal, or at least the price of the deal. Okay, so let's look at what you need to do for due diligence. The first, you want to be able to show a well-articulated patent strategy to your audience. Ideally, you want to be able to show this in a clear and concise way, for example, in one slide. So this basically gives a high-level overview of your patent portfolio and a strategy behind the patent portfolio. You want to show that your patent strategy or patent portfolio match with your business goal. For example, if your business goal is to eventually get a product on sale, do you have exclusivity of this product from your patent portfolio? Or if part of your business goal is to get some revenue, from out-licensing opportunities, does your patent portfolio have enough scope to provide this kind of opportunity? Also, you want to show that your patent portfolio or patent strategy match with the business or marketing strategy. For example, if you keep highlighting some critical selling points in your marketing pitch, are those selling points or critical features covered or protected by your patent portfolio? Or you're trying to say you're going to target multiple markets. Do you have protection in those areas, in those markets? Also, if your product takes some time before, like go through a regulatory process before they're going to launch to the market, how much patent term or patent protection time you have after the product approval or the product launch. Okay, the next issue in due diligence is the quality of the patent portfolio. So this is one step further, from the last slides, the general picture of your patent strategy or portfolio. So these you may not need to show this in a presentation to your audience, but they're going to review your patent portfolio. They may have questions related to these issues. The first is the validity, especially of your patents, especially the core patents, covering the critical, the core technology. For example, like I said, the patent law changes all the time. So you want to make sure any of the patents, your patents, the claims of validity are impacted by the current law change. If that's the case, do you have any solutions? Can you get new claims based on the existing patent application or patent family? Do you have any backup claim if your broadest claim turn out to be invalid? Another consideration is the scope, and we discussed this in the previous slides, right? You want to have your patent or patent portfolio provide enough protection scope so you can block a design around by your potential competitors, and the scope will allow opportunity for out licensing deals if that's part of your plan. And also you want to show that you have opportunity to get more patents based on what you have. So you want to show that based on the existing patent family, you can still file new cases and file new applications to get new claims covering additional aspects. Or is there any opportunity to file a new patent applications, to extend the term and expand the scope of the portfolio? Also, there are some other factors such as number of patents can also be relevant to the quality or the value of your patent portfolio. And you want to be able to show that as well. Another issue in due diligence is ownership. Ownership of your patent or your patent portfolio. So this sounds simple, but can cause real problem if you don't do this, you don't deal with this correctly. So under patent law, the original owner of a patent is the inventor. It's always the inventor. However, if the inventor is an employee of a company, under a typical employment agreement, the inventor would be obligated to assign or transfer his or her ownership in this patent to the employer. And this ownership transfer needs to be documented by a paperwork called assignment, which needs to be signed and recorded at the patent office. So as a company, you want to do the assignment, you want to get the assignment signed and recorded as soon as possible, ideally, right after the patent application is filed, because the inventor they may move, they may retire, they may have some other, they may form their own company. So if you wait for a long time, if you can't get the assignment assigned by the inventor, that can be a problem in due diligence. In some situations, your patents have joint inventors. For example, some consultants, maybe collaborators, are also inventors in on your patents. So in these cases, your patent may be solely owned by your company based on some agreement between the company and the consultant, or maybe jointly owned. So whatever situation, you want to have a clear, clear story about that. For example, if you are saying this jointly, the patent with joint inventor are solely owned by your company, what's your proof? If you're saying they are jointly owned with another party, what's the arrangement, right? What rights do you have? What right do they have? What if the potential buyer are going to buy this portfolio? What do they get from these? There are some cases you may have some license of the IP from another party, like from a university. If that's the case, you want to confirm the licensor's ownership, right? You want to be able to, ideally they have a clear record of assignment from their inventor. Also, if you have a license, during the due diligence, you want to show that the license, make clear the license is transferable or sub-licensable. This is especially important if someone going to acquire this portfolio, including this license, and this can affect the value of the license and the portfolio as well. Well, another issue is the freedom to operate. We just discussed this, a moment ago. So during this due diligence, you're going to want to show that you have freedom to operate. You want to show that you know your key competitors, you know the closest blocking patents, and you have a story how to manage these risks. Well, the last factor consideration for in due diligence is if there is any disputes, like disputes related to ownership or inventorship, or there are any pending litigations between your company and another party, you would need to disclose this to your audience and have an explanation about it. Well, this doesn't apply to everybody, and I hope it doesn't apply to you. But this is if you do have some dispute and you don't want to hide it from your audience. All right, so that's all I have for today's presentation. I see we still have a couple minutes left, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Xiaoban. So we do get one question from our audience, which I think is a very common question. So if there is a patent covering target A inhibition in combination with targeted B inhibition for the treatment of a disease, is this a risk for you to develop your own target A and targeted B inhibitors in combination?
That sounds like a risk. If the patent generally, broadly cover any inhibitor of A and a combination, any inhibitor of A and any inhibitor of B, and if you're developing an inhibitor, combination of inhibitors A and B, that sounds like a risk.
Okay. The next question is, what are estimated time and cost needed to establish a patent portfolio if I have 2 to 3 initial products?
Well, that's a good question. I guess probably, well, in terms of time, like we said, well, let's start with the cost. For cost, for the UA, generally, to get a patent, from filing to a grant from a US patent, assuming everything goes normally, you're talking about the cost of between maybe $30,000 and $50,000 for one patent. But in order to establish a patent portfolio, you would, like we said, you want a multiple patents, in the portfolio, and also you want to file different patent application at different time points. So it's really hard to give even a ballpark, in terms of time and cost for a portfolio. That will depend on your product and how big the portfolio would be to be effective in protecting your product. And I'll give you an example, probably an extreme example. Humira, the drug, antibody drug with the most sales probably in the world, their patent portfolio is so big that the followers or the biosimilar manufacturers very, very difficult, it's almost impossible to knock out the entire portfolio protection. So they launched an antitrust lawsuit against Humira, AbbVie. And that portfolio is huge. So they start filing from 1996, I think late 1990s, and the filings are still all the way from 1990s all the way almost to at least 2012 or even after 2012, more than 20 years filing activities. So that build this whole portfolio is very strong and can give them this leverage on the market. But that's probably an extreme example. But for effective portfolio, you do want to consider, have some protection after, especially after the drug is launched. So yeah, it's really a case by case situation, I think.
Thanks. Last question. Can I still file for a patent if I haven't actually carried out the invention? Any prerequisite?
Yeah, you can. If you have a concept already, you can start with a so-called provisional application. Well, ideally, you want to at least have some data or evidence support. You don't want to. If you just start from like a purely concept, maybe it's too early. But if you have a concept and you think you would have some data relatively soon, you can actually, file a provisional application if you're in the U.S. With a concept and maybe with some examples we call prophetic example, just like lay out the experiment plan. Like this is the concept, and I'm gonna run this experiment testing this concept hypothesis. And within a year, you can file follow-on provisional with some data supporting evidence to, consistent with what disclosed in your first provisional. And within this year, if you file multiple provisional applications, you can combine them together. And within the 1 year mark from the earliest provisional to convert all these, combine them together to a formal, we call a non-provisional application. So in that case, you have a placeholder, which is your first provisional. You have a coverage of your concept with a relatively early priority date, but you still have 1 year's buffering time to add more data and evidence.
Okay, thanks. So, so I also have a question, probably that is on behalf of a lot of us scientists, as a audience for today's talk. So you mentioned about the basic eligibility for the patent, that the product of nature is not really the target or cannot be patentable. So in a lot of cases, those scientists who can find one protein or gene highly related to certain disease, and then they when they work on use mice model to show the knockout or the modification of the certain protein could also have some treatment effect. So then in what way, what recommendation you can give to the audience or the scientists if they see the potential of this patent to be the potential treatment option for certain diseases?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is pretty common, actually. It's a common, invention type in biotech field. You can consider claiming or protecting a product. Think about a product or composition, or maybe a pharmaceutical composition, containing this natural product, natural gene or protein, but with something else, right? If you have a protein, you can see if you can protect, if you have a gene, you can protect a vector, recombinant vector containing this gene, or maybe part of the gene, but also something else that's not naturally existing, or the whole vector itself, even combine two naturally existing things, but in nature, there's the whole vector does not exist in nature. The same thing as a protein, right? You can try to protect maybe a fusion protein, recombinant protein, the protein with something, something label, or maybe a sequence, a signal sequence with the protein or some other elements of the protein to cover the actual product, or maybe the protein or gene or a nucleic acid in a pharmaceutical composition, right? The composition, the pharmaceutical formulation was going to be the final product. So that can be patent eligible. Also, you can always protect the method of using this kind of product, like the method of treatment, method of making, a related method patent. That can be very valuable as well.
Can you specify what that means of a method of treatment?
Oh, like you have a protein, right? The protein itself is a natural product. I can claim like a method of treating disease X by administering, 5 milligrams of the protein to a patient. So that kind of patent it would be okay in terms of eligibility.
Okay, thanks. We got an additional question from our audience. I have a granted patent or patent portfolio. How could I identify the top 3 prospective licensing targets or potential buyers? Forwarding the citation could be an approach.
That's a good question, and that can be tricky sometimes, but because many companies, they don't really disclose the very detailed specifics of their product. So you may need to do your due diligence, just to track, see the companies in your field who may be potentially doing similar things as your company's doing or relevant to your patent coverage. Something you could do maybe a search for patents, for patents using the same keywords or parameter of your patent. See if you can discover any patents owned by other companies. If they're filing this company, patents covering similar product or similar ideas as yours, they may be doing similar things as your company. But yeah, it can be tricky sometimes because some company they tend to hide the details of the specific details of the product.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you so much, Xiaoban, for great sharing today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so now we come to the end of this talk, and I want to thank Xiaoban again for your great insight, and I bet our audience also can find this section being helpful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks to everybody for attending.